Okay, so we are doing part 2 of Oedipus the King, and it's not really, let me look at this for a second. We are a little less than halfway down the play, but we talked a lot about all of the stuff that, the backstory of Oedipus in the first grouping. And I gave you a link both to a live, well, it was live, I mean, a filmed production that really covers the way that plays would have been performed back then. At least, I mean, it's film version, but it still gives you an idea of the masks that they would have worn and how formalistic the action was. And I also give you a link in the last section to the last recording about that kind of goes through the whole background of what happened to Oedipus and before all of this happens. And I think it actually goes into even what happens in the rest of the trilogy, because there are 2 other plays in this trilogy. It was very common for plays to be in threes. So one of this play is, of course, the very first one. The second one is Oedipus at Colonus. I'll just put that, and it just means he's actually on his way to the underworld. He actually goes down into the underworld at the end of the play. And then the last play of the 3 is Antigone, and it actually, even though it's named after Creon, I mean, it's named after Oedipus's daughter, Antigone, it is actually, they say, much more of a tragedy surrounding Creon, who is the character here. So in some ways, the 3 plays create a longer arc, and all of them involve Creon in some way. So, but Creon is just Jocasta's brother in this one, and he gets to be part of the royal family, but he doesn't have to do any of this stuff. Like all of the weight of the pestilence and everything is really on Oedipus's shoulders because he's king. Creon is not. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why what Oedipus says doesn't make any sense to Creon, because Creon is not the king and he's not in charge. And so the truth is all of that stuff, he's going to actually mention this in this scene, and it's going to give us some idea of kind of where Oedipus is. Now, remember, Oedipus is angry at Creon because Tiresias, even though he hemmed and hawed a bunch, the seer finally, whom Creon sent for, Tiresias tells Oedipus to his face, you are Laius's killer. You're the one who killed the king, and you will find that you are brother, son, father, that you are incestuous, and that your kids are your siblings, and your wife is your mother, and all this other stuff. And he lays all of this out, and it's all true. But of course, Oedipus doesn't know it's true, and he thinks that's preposterous. My mom and dad are somewhere else, and of course my kids aren't a pestilence, and blah 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 blah. So he just becomes really angry, and then he claims to Tiresias, well, Creon sent you so that you would give me a bad name publicly, and that would mean that I would lose the kingship, I would lose my crown, and it would be given to Creon. So Creon, this is actually some type of evil plan. This is, what is it? What are we? That I'm being, this is a witch hunt, and I'm being, criticized for something I haven't done so that somebody else can gain power. But it's unfair. It's all lies, lies, lies. Well, of course, the truth is Oedipus doesn't know it's true. He doesn't know. So, I mean, and if you were just told suddenly, hey, by the way, you slept with your own mother, and you've had your own, your own siblings, and blah, 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 you wouldn't believe it either. So it's understandable. There's nothing that Oedipus does that is truly, not understandable. It's just that he's so quick to anger, and the way he insults Tiresias. Honestly, his insulting of Tiresias is the reason the seer finally tells him the truth. Had he let Tiresias leave, had he not goaded him, and had he not, essentially said, oh, you're just a coward, and, had he not kind of bullied him, Tiresias would never have told him the truth. Now, would he eventually have found out? Probably. But because he's so avid and because he's so mean, Tiresias gives him knowledge that he is not prepared to take. because he has no understanding that any of these connections are really made. But and remember, he even goads Tiresias and says, well, you're just blind. What do you know? And Tiresias says, I may be blind, but you can't see. I see truth. You don't. You are ignorant. And so they play off that idea of knowing and blindness, that you can have physical blindness and yet be knowledgeable, and you can be physically able to see and yet not be able to see past your own nose. So now we get to Creon though, and he's already heard the rumors. So he's been off stage, and he comes on and he goes, wait, but he's concerned. He's freaked out. He even says, a frantic word I hear is spoken by our chosen Lord, Oedipus, against me. And here I am come indignant. He's like, I've heard some bad things that Oedipus is saying about me, and it's sort of freaking me out, and I'm kind of upset. And if it's true, that, you know, he's saying all these things, I'm pretty ticked off. And so he even says, he goes, if he dreams, so this is a fantasy, that he hath had from me or deed or lightest thought of injury. In other words, if he really thinks that I have done him any wrong at all. And he says, before God, I have no care to see the sun longer with such a groaning name. In other words, he is giving me a bad name, and it's bringing me dishonor. It's making me upset enough that I don't want to live like that. So he hears the rumors. What does he do? He doesn't hide. He comes directly to meet with Oedipus and go, is this true? And what exactly do you think I've done? So, you know, Creon's not gossiping. He hears the gossip, and he comes and he's like, I gotta fix this. I gotta figure out what it is. And he says, of course, if Oedipus says this, then all of Thebes would hold me guilty. And he says, they should, if I've done something bad. So he's holding himself accountable too. He just says, look, I haven't done anything. And the leader, the person who's, you know, the chorus, like that's what he's called before the translation. But the chorus leader says, look, whatever he said, it was a sudden burst of wrath. They were spoken in anger. He's just angry. And then he says, and then it says the charge was made that Tiresias lied, and he lied because I bribed him. Tiresias hath made answer false, and I bribed him. I bribed him. Like he's almost incredulous. Like, I can't believe someone would say that. And the leader's like, well, maybe it was just a joke. For jest. You know, people do this all the time. They say something mean, and you're like, what? And they go, oh, it's just joking. First of all, when they say that, that's a lie. They just don't want to be caught in saying something mean and snotty. And so they go, oh, I was only joking, so that they don't have to take, you know, the hit for what they've said. You know, they don't want to take responsibility. But the leader's even trying to cover up for Oedipus, and Creon just isn't having it. And he says his heart beat true. His eyes looked steadily and fell not, laying such a charge on me. In other words, he wasn't kidding. And the leader's like, no, I don't know. I'm not in charge. I have no eyes for the thing my masters do. I'm not going to come in and question anything. But here comes Oedipus. So let him talk to you. And so then the leader leaves. Remember, we were talking about the dialogue, that there are only two people speaking at any given time. So the leader says, hey, here comes Oedipus. And Oedipus comes stomping in. He's not like, oh, dear Creon. No, he's like, how now, assassin? And he's mad. Oh, you plotted against me. And he says it in front of all these people. Remember, the whole chorus is standing there. So all of these people of Thebes. And he claims he's robbing his crown. And he's like, now this is really, no, he's not saying what set me down thy butt, like his rear end. He's talking more about the butt of his sword. Okay. So, but essentially he's like, why in the world did you do this to me? And of course he's tearing into Creon. Creon's like, why is he tearing into me? I didn't do anything. But Oedipus is trying to figure out, why would Tiresias say something so awful, which is not true, because of course Oedipus doesn't know it's true. And the only thing that could have, since Tiresias has never met him before, it must be Creon that did this. And he says, he goes, it needeth might of friends, it needeth gold to make a throne thy quarry. So in other words, what money did you spend? What friends did you call on to make this happen to me so that you could take my throne? And he goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. One thing alone I ask thee, let me speak as thou hast spoken. Then with knowledge wreak thy judgment. Let me talk first, and then decide what you really believe. He says, more skill hast thou to speak than I to hear thee. There is peril found in thee. In other words, you're going to twist around your words and make it sound good when it's a lie. And he says, well, let me answer something before it's too late. And he says, well, I already know what your plots are already known. Let me tell you that. And he says, you have too much pride. The man who thinks that bitter pride alone can guide him without thought, his mind is sick. Now, pride, many people would say that if anything, pride is the key to this. So yes, there's irony. You're trying to escape fate, and fate is what you can't escape. But the idea that you can, that Laius and Jocasta have enough pride that they think they can actually avoid fate. And then Oedipus has enough pride that he thinks, and it's really not, it's called, it's hubris, that other people are subject to the laws of fate, but you aren't. It's kind of like those people that own the road that drive other people crazy on the road. They own it. They can switch lanes whenever they want to. They don't have to signal. They can turn in left from a right lane because they think they own the road. The laws, about stopping at a red light, about signaling, about who gets to go next, they don't apply to them. Like they're above that, and that's hubris. So whenever, other people die of cancer, but I wouldn't. Other people may, have a divorce, but I'll never have it. Other people may, but these things don't apply to me. And or other people will get graded and they'll get graded down, but I paid for this class and I deserve an A just because I'm in here, anything like that where there's no real desert, that sense of entitlement, that's all hubris. Okay. So Creon says a man with pride, and that's the only thing that's guiding him, his mind is sick. In other words, you're letting pride get in your way. And then Oedipus is like, somebody who's going to slay his own brother is not good either. And Creon's like, that's true. Thy words are more than just. If I were to slay you or want to slay you, that would be bad. But what do you think I've actually done? And he said, didn't you tell me to talk to Tiresias? He goes, yeah. And that was the right thing to do. And then suddenly he sees a mode of attack. He goes, how many years have passed since Laius died? He can't say it. Speak on, I can't understand thee thus. He goes, passed in thy bloody tempest from men's sight. In other words, died, was murdered. Okay. Creon's like, a long time ago. I don't know how long. At that time was the seer in Thebes? In other words, was Tiresias living here? He goes, oh yeah, he was known even then. Because remember, he's an old dude. Did he ever speak my name? Creon's like, no, not that I know of. Did you search for who slew Laius? He goes, oh yeah, we totally did, but we never found it. And did the seer at that time try to help and say who killed him? And he goes, ask the seer. I don't know. And he says, well, you can answer me one thing. And he goes, this. He goes, until he talked with you, did the seer ever tell you or say to anyone else that I was Laius's murderer? And he goes, I know not if he hath spoken now. Creon wasn't here, remember, when Tiresias was telling Oedipus all this. And he goes, well, I don't know what he said this time. He goes, but let me ask you, is that what he said now? And he goes, ask. Or in other words, did Tiresias say you were the killer? And he goes, no. He goes, but he goes, ask away, thou shalt no murder find in me. And of course, Oedipus doesn't know the truth. And so he's lying. He just doesn't know he's lying. And he goes, that my sister is your wife, right? He goes, yes, of course. I can't say no. And he goes, you reign, giving equal reign to her. He goes, well, yeah, because remember, she was queen before. So if anything, his marrying her made it easier for him to be king, Oedipus, to be king. And he goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, I let her reign along with me. Were we not all as one, she, thou, and I? In other words, we're all royal now. He goes, yes, and there lies thy treachery. So in other words, yes, and you should never have, done these things against me, that we're brothers or something. And Creon's like, whoa, 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 think. Let's think this through. Creon's like, okay, thinkest thou that any man would rather rule and be afraid than rule and sleep untroubled? No, we would not. He goes, who would rather be monarch, bear a monarch's name than do monarch's deeds? In other words, right now, as I now stand, all my desire I compass at thy hand. In other words, because you're king, I get everything I want. I get riches, I get to live in the palace, I get to have all the contacts I need, I can go and do the things I want, I get money, I get, clothes, whatever it is. He goes, were I the king, if I were the king, full half my deeds were done to obey the will of others, not my own. In other words, if I had to be king instead and rule, then I'd have all this other stuff I had to do. I wouldn't get to do whatever I want. I'd have to do all this stuff that I have to do because I'm king. And he says, right now, I don't have any of that. Am I so blind of brain that ease with glory tires me and I would rather change and have a lot of stuff that I have to do? He goes, no. Why would I want to be king? Is life like mine a thing to cast aside and plot to be a king? Never. He goes, and plus, I don't want power. I don't, and I just, that's not, I don't want to rule. I love the fact that I get the advantages, but why in the world would I want to rule? And he goes, look, go on, go to the oracle and find out if I actually repeated what it actually said. Then go all the way, search all the way through Thebes, look for any plots that have anything to do with Tiresias and me. And if you find them, then seize me and strike me dead. And I myself will go, yep, I deserve to die. But I didn't do any of this stuff. I didn't do any of this. I did nothing. I did nothing to you. I plotted nothing with Tiresias. I said nothing wrong from the oracle. Everything the oracle told me, I reported truthfully. But time shall bring truth back. You go and investigate all this stuff, and you're going to see I didn't do anything wrong. And leader's like, you should listen to him. So the leader actually got to do his little bit of trialogue. It's three people speaking. He's like, I'd listen to him if I were you. Mm. And Oedipus, of course, he's not convinced. And he goes, okay. He goes, we will figure it out. Wait patient, and his work shall have prevailed before I move, and mine forever failed. In other words, if we wait on this, he's going to eventually take the throne and he's going to win it. And he goes, what do you want? You want to banish me? And he goes, oh, no, I want you dead. So, I mean, it's really bloodthirsty, Oedipus is. And it's based on nothing, absolutely nothing. This is pure conjecture, but he's ready to kill, to put Creon to death over this. And Creon said, he pleads with him, we'll never soften, we'll never trust thy friend, because he hasn't done anything wrong. And he says, first, I would see how traitors meet their end. And then Creon asks, what if you are blind in everything? And then Oedipus says, these are really interesting statements because they do speak a lot to Greek philosophy. Oedipus says the king must be obeyed. And then Creon says, not if the king does evil. It's funny because this kind of a question will come up again and again and again in society. You know, even the Declaration of Independence, for instance, which is based on a lot of the philosophical thinking in France at the time during the Age of Enlightenment, it says particularly when the king is doing things that a king should not do, when they are doing things that are unjust or cruel, it is our obligation to resist. And so Creon is saying the very same thing. You know, the king, don't obey the king if the king's doing evil. And that would go with Laius. You know, don't obey the king if Laius is trying to kill his own child. You know, that's evil. We shouldn't have done that. And at the same time, Oedipus should not be accusing Creon like this. It's just wrong. And he says, Oedipus says to your king, ho, Thebes is mine. And Creon says, Thebes is my country, not the king's alone. In other words, it's not just your country, it's my country too. And Oedipus draws his sword and is like willing to do something really bad. And the leader calls essentially to the two men and is trying to stop the fight. Don't do anything. And then look, Jocasta is watching. Remember, Jocasta is Creon's sister and Oedipus's wife. And Oedipus loves her. And she loves Oedipus. So she gets pretty upset about it because the last thing you want to see is your brother and your husband going at it and about to fight each other or kill each other even, you know, since Oedipus's sword is drawn. But she tells him to stop. She goes, what in the world is wrong with you? She goes, right now people are dying in the streets and you're fighting. And she says, my lord, come in. She's trying to get Oedipus to come into the palace. Creon, get back to your own house and stir not to such stress of peril griefs that are but nothingness. This is stupid. Don't be fighting. And Creon's like, dude, it's not me. It is the pleasure of thy lord, our king, to do me deadly wrong. His word is passed on me. It is banishment or death. And Oedipus is like, he's with craft and malice practicing against my life. He's plotting against me to kill me so that he can be king. And Creon's like, I didn't do this. I have never done this. I swear, here's my oath. I have never worked against you like that. And Jocasta's like, Oedipus, please believe in. And let's stop this. And the leader again also steps in. Now that's one of those rare times when we have four people speaking, but it's very rare to happen in any play. And it only happens a few times here in this one. And Oedipus is like, well, what would you have me do? And the leader's like, don't reject him. Believe his oath. You don't know what the truth is yet, so don't jump to conclusions. And then Oedipus is like, look, if what Tiresias says is true, for me, then understand well, you seek death or exile from the land. And that means, you know, if you're going to take up for Creon and he's found to be a traitor, Mr. Leader, then you're going to be found to be a traitor. And he threatens the leader with exile and death. And the leader's like, what? I didn't do anything. And this is really sorrowful. Stop. And Oedipus says, fine, let him go. Go ahead and run away. And, you know, it's honestly, it's really hurtful to Creon, but the main thing is he doesn't want to die. So Creon does leave. And Jocasta says, okay, well, let me talk to him and find out what happened. And she finds out, you know, the leader tells her a little bit that both of them are angry, but a lot of it is from Oedipus. And the Oedipus is resentful even that the leader stopped him. And so Jocasta finally steps in and she says, okay, come on, what is the deal? He says, and she's like, please, can we like not do this? And he goes, I will. Okay, fine. I have more regard for thee than these, thy brother plots to murder me. And she's like, okay, make all thy charge. In other words, say all the evidence you have, only be clear. And he goes, well, he says, I'm Laius's murderer. And he goes, he says it himself. Oh, no, he had Tiresias say her. And she goes, a seer? Don't believe seers. They're stupid. And she goes, here, I'll prove it to you. So, and then she talks about Laius and herself. And so she's trying to give evidence that says, hey, like, seers really don't know anything. They're a little crazy, and you can't trust what they say because they're not always right. Okay, and let me give you an example. So we were told by a seer that if we had a kid, then that son would kill Laius. Okay, and so we were a little worried about it. So we took the baby, and by another's hand, out on a desert mountain, we left him where the land is rock. We cast him to die. Through both his feet a blade of iron they drove. Thus did we cheat Apollo of his will. In other words, we were told he was going to kill Laius, but he didn't. We took the baby. We again, hubris. That's the word. That's the big word. We had to solve this. We didn't want the fate to happen. And so we stabbed the baby through his feet, which is a horrible thing to do, and dumped him out on a mountain to die. Cast him to die. And so he never killed, he didn't kill Laius. And Oedipus is like, what? What turmoil? He's like, woman, what turmoil hath thy story wrought within me? This is bad. The evidence that she gives is bad stuff. And he goes, she goes, what do you mean? It makes you all, you're acting freaky. It turns thee like a frightened thing. And he goes, 'twas at a crossing of 3 ways this king was murdered. Yeah, she goes, that was the tale. It is not yet forgotten. And he goes, a crossing of 3 ways. Where? In Focus. A road on either hand from Delphi comes, and Dahlia in a glen. And she's like, oh my God. Because he remembers, he came from Delphi. Remember, he went straight from the oracle at Delphi, and he was walking in this direction, met a guy at where 3 roads meet. And that's where the murder happened. Okay. And Oedipus says, how many years and months have passed since then? She goes, but a little time before proclaim was made of thee for king. So just a little bit before you were made king. What? And he's freaking out. And she goes, what's wrong? And he goes, don't ask me yet. But what did Laius look like? And this is where the irony comes in. Because remember, Jocasta doesn't know that Oedipus killed Laius. Oedipus doesn't know that Oedipus killed Laius. Okay. And she goes, oh, well, he was tall. He in shape, just as such a man as thou. He looked a lot like you. Which is bad, because if he looked a lot like Oedipus, they might have been related. And Oedipus says, even at this point, this is halfway through the play, Oedipus says, God help me, I much fear that I have wrought a curse on my own head and knew it not. So right here, halfway through the play, Oedipus is wondering if maybe he killed Laius. So he just barely trashed Tiresias, trashed Creon, and then Jocasta tells him this little story, and he goes and takes a big deep breath and goes, oh no, wait a second. How did he die? And it freaks Jocasta out a lot. And he says, the horror if the blind can see. In other words, if Tiresias is right, then we're in trouble. And he says, answer but one thing and 'twill all be clear. And she goes, okay. And he goes, was he with just a few people, or was he with lots of people, armed followers, like a lord of the land? And she goes, only 4 men were with him. 1 a herald, 1 chariot there was where Laius rode alone. And he goes, oh my God. And he even says, 'tis clear now, like he's almost sure he's actually the one who did it. Because who did he encounter? A guy with 4 servants. not a big entourage, no real evidence that he was the king of something, just a man with 4 servants. And so this is matching still. And he goes, is there somebody who could tell me the story? Like somebody who could tell me what happened? He goes, yeah, the house servant, the one that survived. He goes, the one man, is he in the house? And she goes, oh, no, no. When he came home and found you on the throne, he took my hand and prayed me earnestly to send him to the mountain heights to be a herdsman, far from any sight or call of Thebes. And so I sent him there. He was a good dude. He was a good servant. He was actually a thrall, which means he was a slave. But he was a good slave. So if that's what he wants to do, then I sent him there. And he said, do you think you could find him? So this is halfway through the play. And this is where we play around with that whole, it all has to happen in the same amount of time, that, that unity of time. Because if he's that far away from Thebes, it's going to take a while to go get him. But they literally send somebody off to go get him, and he's there by the end of the play. And she goes, oh yeah, totally. Well, what would you do with the essentially the herder, the shepherd? And he goes, I'm afraid to say, but I have some questions, and I need the man to tell me truth. And she goes, oh, okay. But shouldn't I know too what you're asking? And he goes, you will. He goes, I need to be more sure of things first, because he's afraid to say it. And so he goes, but he goes, I will, let me tell you what my misgivings are. Okay. So, and so he tells her a story. Remember, she told him the story of Laius, which freaked him out, about how Laius died. And this is his story about his origin, or at least what he knows. So my father was Polybus, and Merope was my mom. And they're both of Corinth, the king and queen of Corinth. And I was held to be the proudest in Corinthia till one day. It was weird, but we were at a feast, and some dude was drunk. Someone flushed with wine cried out at me that I was no true son of Polybus. Oh, I was wroth. I was mad. And I didn't say anything, but on the next day, I went and talked to my parents, and I told them what somebody had said, and they rose in their pride and smote the mocker. They satisfied all my desires. So does that mean they killed the person who said so? But they absolutely didn't. They denied it, and they took care of the person who had claimed that he was not the true son of Polybus and Merope, which is an actual truth. And finally, he didn't say anything about it. They took care of the person who had slandered him, but he still felt weird about it. So he went to Delphi. So I went forth to Pythos floor. That's the oracle at Delphi. And I had a question in my head. And the question was going to be, is our Polybus and Merope my mom and dad? That's his question. But the oracle doesn't ever answer things the way that they don't say yes or no. They instead say something else, and it's all in verse, and it's all very cryptic. And so instead of answering the question, are they yes, they're your parents, they recited this this prophecy that he was going to kill his dad, murder mine own father's blood, and I was going to know my mother's body and beget thereon a race no mortal eye durst look upon. So I was going to sleep with my mom and have kids through incest, and I was going to kill my own dad. I was going to murder him and spill his blood. And so he was standing at the oracle and went, oh, no, 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 no. I fled from the dark south where Corinth lay to lands far off, where I might never see my doom of scorn fulfilled. So he says, this is what the oracle said, that I was going to kill my mom and dad. And I went, no, 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 can't do it. And I fled. And so while I was fleeing, I reached the region where, according to your story, the king of Thebes was struck to death. Well, let me tell you what happened. So I was at the crossing, and there was a herald, just like you said, and over his head a man behind strong horses charioted met me, and both wanted me to get out of the way. And I said, and so the herald went up to try and hit him and tried to push him out of the way, and he hit. I in wrath smote him that pushed me. 'Twas a groom who led the horses. Not a word the master said, but watched. And as I passed him on the road, down on my head his iron branched goad stabbed. So as he's walking past Laius strikes him with his iron branched goad. And by heaven, he rued it. In a flash, I swung my staff and saw the old man crash back from his car in blood. And he killed all of them. And he says, if that man in the chariot was Laius, I am a miserable person. What man doth move more miserable than I, more dogged by the hate of heaven? He goes, but if that was Laius, then I actually did kill him. Because so he's not thinking, oh, could Laius be my dad? Instead, he's thinking, I was there, and if that's how it happened, if I was, if Laius was killed in that way on a chariot with 4 servants at that crossroads, and I could have done that. And if I killed him, then I hold the dead man's wife in these polluting arms. And am I a thing born of evil? So, the truth is he's like, okay, even if nothing else, he's a king killer. And that's regicide. I'm going to write that in here. Because you're not supposed to kill kings. Kings are not supposed to be murdered. Macbeth, if you read Macbeth in high school, then you'll know you're not supposed to kill a king. So that's bad. And he goes, am I foul in every vein? He goes, I'm going to be banished if I am the leader. If I'm the one who murdered Laius, if I'm the one that is causing the plague because I'm still unpunished. And he says, but I can't, what am I going to do? He goes, if I'm exiled, I can't go back to Corinth because I can't go back in case I fulfill the prophecy. So he's looking at it as 2 separate prophecies. So, Laius said he was going to get killed. Well, he got killed, and now they're saying that the killer hasn't been punished. If I'm the punisher, if I'm the one who killed him, I'm going to be exiled. And if I'm exiled, I can't go back to Corinth because then I'll kill my dad and marry my mom. And that's not okay. So where am I supposed to go? But he already feels like he probably is Laius's killer, or at least it's highly likely. And he goes, whoa. The leader says, wait, before you assume that you're the murderer, let's talk to the guy who was the witness. Okay. And he goes, okay, one shred of hope I still have, and I'll wait till the herdsman comes. And he goes, okay. And then Jocasta says, but what else do you need? And he says, if we mark him close and find him speak as thou hast, then I'm lifted from my dread. And she goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, if he says there was a whole band of robbers, a whole bunch of people who killed Laius and his men, that's not me. Because remember, that thing doesn't make sense. So maybe it happened in that crossroads, but if a whole band of robbers did it, Oedipus knows he's alone. He wasn't with a whole band. They weren't robbers. He just happened to be the servant attacked him and he killed the servant, and then the old man hit him over the head and he attacked him and killed him. So, but if he says it's just one dude, only one guy was out there murdering the king and everybody, then I'm in trouble. And she goes, it's okay. She goes, be sure, as it is, he told us there was a whole group of people. She goes, that's, and besides, Laius's death didn't fall true anyway. He was supposed to die by his own, slain by his own son. And that baby's dead. So prophecies don't mean diddly squat. And he goes, you're right. Yeah. So if as it is, it would have to be his own son who killed him. And that wouldn't be me anyway, because he has no idea yet. And that's what's weird is that this is the king he killed, and yet that's a lesser crime than what he did. And I'm just kind of skipping the chorus stuff parts because they're all they do is kind of reiterate much of what's, in case you missed it because you were out going to potty, then this is what happened while you were missing that scene. It's kind of that way. Plus, it gives the actors a break. They go back in, then they come back out. And so now she comes back, and she's actually kneeling to Apollo. And a stranger comes in, okay, while she's kneeling. And the stranger says, is there somebody I can talk to? I need to talk to Oedipus the king. Preferably, I'd talk to him himself. And Jocasta comes up and she goes, and the leader says, well, this is his wife. This is the queen. And the stranger's like, yay, it's happy. And ringed with happy faces may she live. In other words, this is a happy news, and but it's sad news too, but it's mostly good news. And she goes, well, what news? And he says, oh, it's good news for you and the king. She goes, well, what is it? I came from Corinth, and the news is going to give you joy, but also pain. And she goes, well, what is it? She goes, what? He says, well, it's time for, we just have, in Corinth, they've sent me essentially because Corinthians have decided to make Oedipus king. And she goes, well, did Polybus lose power? In other words, is old Polybus in power no more? And he goes, oh, no, he died. Death has a greater power. His reign is o'er. What? And Jocasta's like, Oedipus' father is dead? Remember, he was supposed to kill his dad. And he goes, yes. He goes, if I speak false, let me die instead. She goes, oh, this is wonderful news. Go get Oedipus. And she kind of like snots at the oracle. She goes, where stand ye at the last, ye oracles of God? She mocks them. For many a year Oedipus fled before that man in fear to slay him. And behold, we find him thus slain by a chance death, not by Oedipus at all. In other words, so much for the oracle. And he comes out and he goes, what is it? And she goes, listen to what he says. And he says, I'm coming from Corinth. And well, she says that. And Polybus is dead. She goes, what? He goes, what? He goes, yes. Polybus lieth in his grave. And he goes, he's not murdered? Well, he's old. No, he just died of old life. A slight thing turns an old life to its peace. In other words, he was old. He died of old age. He's just old. The growing years lay heavy on his head. And the Oedipus is like, what? Well, then the oracles make no sense at all. They said I was going to murder my own father. And here he is in Corinth dead. And I didn't do it. I never slew him. I never came near him. I didn't come near him for years. But how did he die? And remember, Polybus is old. And Jocasta's like, see, I told you. Did I not say that this was going to be clear soon? And he goes, yeah, I was warped by my own fear. And she goes, now you can forget about it. And he goes, I can't forget what they said about my mom. It's not over yet. And she goes, really? She goes, you actually think you're still going to do something like that? And he goes, no. He goes, my mother still lives, and I understand your wisdom and everything, but I'm not going to go near her. But your dad didn't die at your hand. So she's still trying to convince him, the oracles really aren't right. And then the stranger says, he says, Oedipus says, well, I'm still going to stay away from her. As long as she's alive, I'm going to stay away from Corinth. And the stranger says, why are you so afraid? And he goes, well, Merope, who dwelt with Polybus. And he goes, yeah, well, why would that frighten you? And he goes, a voice of God, a stranger. And he says, essentially an oracle. Yeah, they said, long ago, Apollo spake a doom that I should know my mother's flesh, and with mine own hands spill my father's blood. That's why I've stayed away from Corinth, because I don't want to kill my dad and marry my mom. And he goes, that's what kept you away? He goes, yeah, well, wouldn't it be good if you weren't afraid? And he goes, well, how are you supposed to make that happen? And he says, well, let me tell you. He goes, you don't understand what path you're on. And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, all this stuff, this, thinking that you would hurt your mom and your dad, that's what kept you so long from Corinth. He goes, yeah. And he goes, and he even says, fear lest thou take defilement from the two that gave thee birth. He goes, yeah, I'm scared to death of that. And he goes, well, then your terror is for nothing. And he goes, how? We're not your king and queen, my parents. And he goes, no, he's, you were adopted. And the stranger's like, he was no more your father than I was. What? Well, then why did he say I was his kid? Well, you were by gift long years ago. Mine own hand. This is the messenger. I brought the baby to him years and years and years ago. What? But he loved me. He goes, well, he didn't have a child and he really wanted a kid. And you bought a child for him? He goes, oh, no, no, no. I found it up on the mountain. And Jocasta is going, Hur! And he goes, why? How did you do that? And he goes, well, I was a shepherd back then. And I was, and he goes, did you just wandered around and found a baby? And he goes, well, it was, I mean, I saved your life. And he goes, why? He goes, well, there was a spike through both your feet. I released you. What? And that's why they call you Oedipus, who walks in pain. It's really, swollen foot. And he goes, well, who were my parents? He goes, I don't know. How should I know who your parents were? But you had, so you didn't find me, but you got me from somebody else. Yeah, a shepherd gave him to me. What shepherd? I think he was Laius's shepherd. You mean Laius, the king of Thebes? Well, yeah. That's where his herds went. Is the shepherd living? Is that person alive? He goes, I don't know. You'd know. I haven't met him since. And of course, Jocasta already knows something's up. I found your feet bound by a spike. She knows what that was. And so she knows right at that moment that Oedipus is her son. And so Oedipus says, well, you heard what he said. Is this not weird? And Jocasta says, I only pray not to remember. Tales are vainly told. Don't ask the questions. And he goes, but it's about who, my birth parents. Why would I not ask these questions? And she says, for God's love, no. If you care at all for your own life, my anguish is enough. And he's like, fear not. And he gets mad at her. He goes, are you worried that I might be born of a slave from my third granddam down? It doesn't cast shame on you. Like, he assumes the only reason she's worried is because he may not be a king. He might not be royal. And she goes, no, please don't ask anymore. And he's like, you're not asking. He says, we need the truth. And she's like, you don't want to know the truth. And finally she says, oh, child of woe, I pray God, thou never know. Because she knows at that moment, she knows exactly, what she's done, what she did a long time ago, and what it turned out into, and who Oedipus is, and that she has 4 kids by her own son. And she is horrified. And she says to him, unhappy one, goodbye. Goodbye before I go this once and never, never more. So she's going right in. She rushes into the palace, and at this moment, she goes into a room and she is hanging herself to die. She's committing suicide because she knows what's true. And so then, yeah, we're making okay time. So then he's like, oh no, we got to figure out what's going on. And he's like, what is wrong with my wife? Of course he's dismissive, and he shouldn't be. He's angry at her, and he shouldn't be. If he knew what she knew, he would not be so angry. And so here comes the shepherd. And this is important. He's led by 2 slaves. He is an old man and seems terrified. Would he have come? No, he would have run away, and he never would have been seen again, because he's the one where all the chips fall at this point. And he admits, he was raised in Laius's household. He's a slave there. He was a shepherd, and Oedipus and the stranger, the messenger from Corinth, interrogate him, and they find out for real. He goes, dude, I remember you. You gave me the baby, and Do you remember that? And Shepherd's trying to, oh, I don't really remember. And he's like, no, 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 say it for real. Thou gavest me there in the wild a baby to rear far off as mine own child. And he's like, why are you asking me this? Because he knows what it means. The shepherd knows Oedipus is the baby. He knows Oedipus killed Laius. So he knows all of this stuff. And Oedipus is like, would you talk? Talk. And Shepherd doesn't want to talk. Says he's lying, says, oh, I don't remember, tries to, cover up the truth over and over and over and over again. And finally, the shepherd has to admit he has no choice, but he has to admit, because he says, if I ask again, you are going to die. And Shepherd says, I got it from Laius. He goes, was it a slave or was it Laius's kid? And Shepherd has no choice. No, then, they said, 'twas Laius' child, but she within, thy wife best knows its fathering. And he goes, she's the one who gave it to you? Jocasta gave him the baby. And he says, yes. And he goes, and what were you supposed to do with that baby? And he goes, destroy it. Her own child? Cruel. And she says, he says, dark words of God had made her wild. And he goes, well, the babe was supposed to slay his own father. And he says, the king, he says, I felt bad for the king. He thought, that he could move the baby away. And he's like, oh my God. And so, and he knows that he killed, and the king recognizes the shepherd. He knows that that was the servant who was killed, and who wasn't killed, and who ran away. He knows everything. So not only does he know that he is Oedipus, son of Laius and Jocasta, he knows that he killed Laius, and then he slept with Jocasta. Well, he married her, but he slept with Jocasta and had 4 kids by Jocasta, his own mother. And this is all as unnatural as you can ever get. And he says, all shall be fulfilled. Oh, on these eyes shed light no more. Ye everlasting skies that know my sin. I've sinned in birth and breath. I've sinned with woman. I have sinned with death. And he leaves. Now, of course, we had that whole, eyes on these eyes shed light no more. So he's going to go in, and this is actually when he does it off stage. Greeks did not do violence on stage. They'd have a war, and then people would like cart on a cart of bodies and go, oh, there was so much death. And then they'd kind of like walk them off again. Romans were the ones who wanted to show everything on stage, and they had people really die. And, like gladiators did fight to the death, And so now the chorus is sitting there horrified. They're like, what in the world has happened? Everything is a mess. Now we know that the king is the killer of the other king. Now we know all this stuff. I can't believe what he has done. And he goes, man, the messenger's horrified because he didn't expect all of this to happen. Who knew that my good news was actually bad news? And he goes, but then the messenger went in, followed him into the palace. He comes back out and he goes, I have even worse news. Jocasta's dead. And he goes, because remember, she can't commit suicide on stage. She has to do it off stage, but then they tell about it. This actually happens even in Shakespeare. In Hamlet, Ophelia actually commits suicide. She drowns herself, but it's all off stage. And so they just come back in and go, oh no, Ophelia has committed suicide. She got into the spring, in the stream, and was just floating there until the weight of the water pulled her clothes under, and then she drowned herself, singing the whole time. But they describe it with it rather than showing it. And that happens a lot. Even Macbeth and Macduff, they fight at the end of Macbeth, and then they go off stage, and then Macduff cuts off Macbeth's head and comes back with it. So that they didn't actually kill, one of them didn't die on stage. So then he describes this, essentially Oedipus runs in to go and kill her, to interrogate her and kill her, but she's already dead. So we didn't know what the woman was doing. He's like, he's calling for a sword, that wife, no wife, that field of blood. So he's blaming her, even though she didn't know what she was doing any more than he did. Sin on sin had birth, polluted generations. He's raging, and there she is, and she's dead. And so he's the first one to find her, but there she's swinging from a noose like a dead bird. And he's horrified by that. And he takes the pin out of her garment, and he stabs himself in the eyes. And he says, out, out, ye never more shall see me, nor the anguish, nor the sins of me. So remember, he said to Tiresias a long time ago, hey, you're blind, you don't know anything. And Tiresias said, dude, you may be able to see, but you don't know anything. Now that he sees what he has done, he can't bear the sight of it. And so he stabs himself in the eyes. Now, what he did is he went in there and he put a new mask on with all sorts of bloody eye stuff, you know. And so he comes out blind. And the leader's like, what happened now? And he goes, well, now he's shouting for one to open wide the gate and lead him forth. He's exiling himself because he is his father's murderer, his mother's. And then he even says, nay, such words I will not speak, because he slept with his mother. His incestuous relationship. That in so many ways to the Greeks was even worse. Like, you don't have kids with your own mom. That's gross. And yet and so he's saying, open the gates and let and exile me, because he still has to save Thebes. He promised he would. And the only way to do that is to punish Laius's killer, and that's himself, so he must leave. So he's taking the honorable path anyway. He's not fighting it and going, no, I'm going to stay king. No, he's saying, I can't be king. I'm not fit to be king. And he passes judgment on himself. And the leader's just devastated. All the people are devastated because they liked him. And they're all, everything's horrifying. Oedipus is devastated, and we feel bad for him. As much as he was angry and he did all this, said all these things he shouldn't have said, he's still trying to be an honorable person, but he's gut punched. He cannot believe what he has done, that in trying to avoid all of the fate, he actually ended up committing every atrocity he was trying to avoid. And he blames gods. 'Tis Apollo, 'tis all Apollo. And he did. I mean, you can certainly blame it on the oracle, because it set everybody on the paths they ended up going. Had the oracle not said to Jocasta and Laius, hey, you're going to have a kid who's going to kill you, he would never have done this. They would never have abandoned the baby. And then he would have been raised with Laius and Jocasta, and he never would have killed his mom. I mean, killed his dad or married his mom. He wouldn't have done any of that stuff. And so he says, that curse that I said, that curse is now on me. And he says, oh, it's too bad I didn't die a baby. And the leader says, I would have been happier too. So it's like, what a horrible thing, that you'd rather have died as a baby than have committed all the things that you have committed. And it's just awful. So he says, thou wert better dead than living blind. And Oedipus Colonus, in the next play, he actually walks down into like through a trapdoor or something. He walks down into Colonus, from Colonus into the underworld. So he's going to die. But who wants to stay alive when this is what one's life has become? And then he actually says goodbye to his daughters. Ismene and Antigone come out. And he says goodbye to them. And Creon is awful. I mean, Creon's devastated too. He's like, this is so sad. He even says, don't cast, don't, can't you stay? Can't we have pity? Can't we do something? And Oedipus is like, no. Because no matter what Oedipus said to Creon doesn't want him to have to leave, to be gone. And so Creon's like, what can I do? And he says, get me out of Thebes, exile me now. And he goes, but I shouldn't we ask what Apollo wants me to do? And he goes, no, he said, cast the killer out. And Oedipus is like, no, don't, just, you have to get out. Otherwise the sin stays, and then the people will still be harmed. You have to punish me for this. And then he says, but my children, nay, Creon, my sons will ask thee for no care. Men are they. So the sons are grown up, the daughters aren't. But my two poor desolate maidens, there was no table ever set apart for them. So in other words, I'm not king anymore. What's going to happen to them? Creon, I pray, forget them not. In other words, Creon, could you take care of my daughters? And he says, Creon goes and gets the girls, and he actually touches their faces and weeps. And he says goodbye to his little girls. And one of them, and they're crying because they're saying goodbye to dad. And then he says, children, where are you? Hither, come to these arms of your, and then he says, brother. And he realized, I mean, it's awful. It's really terrible. And so then he and Creon clasp hands with an understanding. He's going to take care of the two daughters, and I have to go. And so he says, he goes, Creon has no choice. He has to do what the gods asked him to. And this is really where Oedipus accepts the fate of gods, the will of the gods. And that's what every good Greek had to do. Whether you liked it or not, you have to do what the gods say. The gods are immortal, you are not, and you are subject to the whim of fate and to the whim of the gods. And so that's where it's led. And it's really sad. It's a tragedy. He's led back into the house, the door closes, and that's the end of the play. And he's exiled. The end. So if you have questions after you've watched the videos, please let me know, and I will talk to you guys later.